morning. Thank you very much for coming here at that early hour. Let's talk about WordPress 4.1. Development on WordPress 4.1 started at the end of September this year, and it's slated to be released in the week of December 8th. It's on the verge of entering beta right now. Beta has actually been delayed about half a week now. Actually, it's a week now. It'll be a powerful release with lots of user-facing features and also under-the-hood improvements. It's also going to be a very good example of how WordPress structures its releases in general, how they're developed, how they're tested, and how they're polished. WordPress tries to do 3 releases a year. After WordPress 2.0, it took over a year to release WordPress 2.1, which was a fairly painful experience for everyone involved. So at the time, Matt Mullenweg, the co-founder of WordPress, he suggested to do a 4-month release cycle with 2 months of development, another month of polishing it up, and another month of testing it. And the last month will be preceded by a beta 1. And each release cycle is led by one or more core contributors. And whoever that is being determined by lead developers of the project for each release separately. They mostly look the same. They have a fairly consistent schedule. It starts with a kickoff meeting where the areas of work are suggested, feature plugins are evaluated, then there's the 2 months of development that I just mentioned. We have a beta phase where no new features are being introduced, but only bugs are being worked on. We have release candidates, usually about 2 or 3 release candidates, and after a code freeze, it'll finally be released. When we look over the last 4 years of WordPress releases, we see that we've been fairly consistent with the 3 releases a year model. When you look at the version numbers, a major WordPress version is dictated by the first 2 sequences of a version number. So 3.5, for example, would be a major release. And so is 3.6 and 7, all the way up to 4.0. And 4.0 is really no different than 3.9 or 4.1, which we are currently working on. So this is a major release. So there is really no WordPress 3 or WordPress 4 like in other projects. We're kind of weird like that for historical reasons. There are also minor releases throughout those major releases, of course, and Nathan touched on that yesterday during his keynote. I hope you were there. And they're now mostly being shipped by automatic updates. He mentioned that since they were introduced in 3.7, the last automatic updates for 3.9 were 98% automated. About a year ago, WordPress started to adopt a practice of developing new features as plugins first. So those plugins' goal is ultimately to be put forward as a new feature in WordPress, in a future version of WordPress. This model allows for a more efficient and collaborative way of development over longer periods of time. And it also removes the bottleneck of a limited amount of core committers. As well as lowering the barrier of entry for new contributors, because they, can dive into contributing to a plugin rather than learning core code immediately. It lets features be decoupled from releases, so releases don't really have to wait for features to be ready anymore, and vice versa, just as well. It allows for fast iteration, and it's easier for developers to take risks with those feature plugins. And this is what they're meant to do with it too. And worst case scenario, even if a feature plugin does not end up being included into core, the community has a great plugin to use with a great feature that has been worked on by knowledgeable members of the WordPress community. So it's a win-win situation for everyone involved, really. Keeping that in mind, 4.1 is shaping up to be a smaller release in terms of visible features than others maybe, but we had over 150 enhancements and over 200 bugs that already have been fixed so far. One of the areas of focus for WordPress over the last few years have been localization improvements that we've done. About 70% of installations are English installations. But as you can see from the graph here, less than 50% of downloads now are English downloads. For the first time in 4.0, we had non-English downloads surpass English downloads. About 10% of the world's population speaks English, and only 5% has English as their first language. So this is a trend that is likely to continue, and a huge potential for WordPress with new users throughout the world, and something that, yeah, we wanted to focus on and improve. One of the features in 4.1 that does that is on-the-fly language loading in WordPress. So if you want to change this, the language of your site now, you can go to the settings administration area and select a drop-down, from a drop-down, your desired language. And it gets loaded automatically once you hit that save button. It gets loaded, downloaded automatically, it gets installed, and you don't have to go to WordPress.org anymore to download it and upload it yourself and install it. This is all done automatically. And on the next page load, the admin is already in the new language. The dropdown is also split between installed and available languages, so it's really, it really doesn't make a difference anymore. Another feature would be localized plugin and theme repositories that are coming in 4.1. Plugins and themes have been one of the major contributors to WordPress's success so far. And it's not accessible to the vast majority of people. I just mentioned only 10% of the world speaks English. And so for 90% of the world's population, they don't really have a good way to navigate the theme and plugin repository. Users use plugins and themes to individualize their sites, to add functionality that WordPress doesn't offer out of the box, right? Everyone here that has a WordPress site has probably more than one plugin installed, I assume. And so it's really difficult for people that don't speak English to have the same advantage and have the same possibilities in that regard. In 4.1, plugin README files will be translatable, as well as descriptions of those plugins. So users will be able to browse the theme and plugin repository from the backend of their site in the admin area in their own languages, and can use search terms in their own languages to find plugins and themes and download them immediately. When they do look for plugins, they might find suggested plugins, which is also something that comes new in 4.1. With the automatic updates that we've been doing since 3.7 and the information that we gathered from there, we're now able to take the update data and calculate plugins that are frequently installed together. And based on that, and the plugins that a user has already installed on their site, we're able to make a pretty educated recommendation of what other plugins that user might be interested in, which ends up in a way more tailored experience when you browse the plugin repository from the back end of your site, of course. Over the last few years, WordPress has gotten better and better on iterating on existing features. The session manager would be one of those features. In 4.0, we started to have cookies and nonces tied to user sessions, so they may be invalidated upon logout. And in 4.1, we're now adding a user interface to that to let users manage active sessions on other devices. This is a screenshot from the feature plugin of the session manager. Currently, they're still debating whether they want to adopt the entire UI like this, or whether they just need that button that you see on the bottom of the screen here for a simpler UI for users. To give them the opportunity to log out of other sessions on other devices. But this is what it could look like, for example. Focus is yet another example for iterating on existing features. In WordPress 3.2, we introduced distraction-free writing. And it used to be its own UI. It had an editor and a simplified toolbar where you can manipulate your text. In 4.1, this is now unified and allows for quick access to meta boxes around the editor. It builds on editor scrolling improvements we did in 4.0. So when you have big blocks of content and you scroll up and down, that toolbar will now stay with you. And that's what Focus is building upon. I mentioned under the hood improvements as well, and this would be one of those. There were quite a few improvements on meta taxonomy and date queries in 4.1. Before that, you couldn't really mix and or clauses, and you couldn't group clauses and or relationships. And these limitations made it kind of difficult for advanced content filtering, or complex content filtering, really. In 4.1, we now support multi-relation queries that can be grouped and nested to an arbitrary depth in meta taxonomy and date queries, with the positive side effect of a complete rewrite and radical simplification, of course, of how WP meta query is generating its SQL. It's a lot faster. We have speed improvements there, and an improved unit test coverage as well, which is essential for any meaningful refactoring. All those improvements are a lot of the unglorified work that is required for more exciting improvements in the future, probably 4.3 and later. So this is kind of the groundwork for that. This time of year, car manufacturers are introducing their 2015 models, right? And WordPress is kind of doing the same. They introduced the 2015 theme, or default theme. They've been doing that for about 5 years now, starting with 2010, where each year they introduce a new default theme. This year was 2014, that was a magazine theme. Last year, 2013, was a blog theme, and the year before, a CMS theme. So we were able to shift focus on our default themes, mix up the design as well, and show users different aspects of WordPress and what it can do, and kind of highlight different parts of it. 2015 will be mobile first. It's going to be very clean and have a simple design, but it'll be highly customizable and might just as well look like this. It takes advantage of core customizations tools that have been around for quite a while, but a few themes have really taken advantage of it, like 2015 does right now. And it's designed to maximize that impact of those customization tools. So on the sidebar, you can see the image here is actually a header image that is used as a background, and the background color is from a custom background implementation. On the top right, you see 2015 in tablet mode, so it's of course responsive, as it is developed mobile first. And will come in WordPress 4.1. Let's take a quick look at what the future holds for us after WordPress 4.1. I touched on language improvements, and in one of the next versions, we'll be able to take advantage of language packs in WordPress that will decouple translations from plugins and themes. Those translations will then be made available through the regular update process that you know from plugins and themes. With the benefit of plugins not having to update anymore to add translations. If you have a plugin in the repository and you could send new translations, you've probably all seen those updates for plugins where it's like add Spanish translation. So that's not necessary anymore. It's completely decoupled. And users now only download languages they actually use instead of all of them, really. And the plugin size is smaller and the download is way faster. So basically, translations can be handled much easier and even ignored by the author entirely if desired. At the time of proposing this talk, it looked like there would be one more feature in 4.1, which would be the JSON REST API. It's currently being developed as a feature plugin. It's in version 1.1, I believe. And that plugin will serve as a compatibility layer once it gets into core. So it is safe to work with it already. The JSON REST API has the potential to entirely change the way that developers interact and work with WordPress in the future. Although an interface for third-party applications is nothing new, really, for WordPress. We've had the XML RPC API for years, and it served us well, too. It's flexible, it works well with documents and media, and since it's been activated by default in 3.5, it's been reliable for applications to use. On the other hand, its authentication is kind of insecure. It's not very well suited for exchanging data, and it needs an XML parser to understand its output. JSON is much easier to work with. It's easier for humans to read and write. It's easier for machines to parse and generate, and lots of programming languages work well with it. The team that has been working on the JSON REST API plugin has also come up with a few client libraries that you can use already. So there's a PHP library that you can use to build upon the API. There's also a JavaScript client library written in Backbone, and one for WP CLI, the WordPress command line interface. Some of the things you can do with it are, for example, client-side CRUD operations. So create, read, update, and delete operations. You could do a Backbone or Angular-driven theme or plugin. You could do infinite scrolling and receive content through the API. Form submissions and validation would be another use case, or front-end editing for content. Or you can communicate with other WordPress sites, like displaying and managing content from other sites within the multi-site network, or from a completely different and separate WordPress site at all. Or you could even break away from WordPress completely and display and manage content in a mobile app, for example, or integrate your content with other application platforms. One of the most visible features or implementations of the WordPress REST API would probably be the election night coverage from last week's midterm elections by the New York Times. They used a Ruby-generated static front-end for their site and wrote a live blogging administration tool in Backbone for them to update posts. And they used the API like it was already launched, and it was easily able to handle their massive amount of traffic for that site. So this is a really nice example for how you can already use the WordPress REST API, even though it's not in core yet. You can find the plugin at wordpress.org/plugin/JSON REST API. Please feel free to download it and play with it and build up on it and give us feedback on it. If you want to get more involved yourself, you can go to github.com/WP-API/WP-API and help us build it as well. My name is Konstantin Obenland. I'm on Twitter and GitHub under @Obenland. I blog at konstantin.obenland.it. I've been a WordPress contributor since 3.4 in various formats. I work at Automattic as a code wrangler, and I'm currently on a team that is dedicated to contributing to WordPress Core full-time. I'm happy to take your questions now, if there are any questions. Yes?
So as of right now, you're not sure whether the JSON REST API will be
So as of right now, as of right now, I'm not sure whether the JSON REST API will be in 4.2 or 4.3. Yes, no, I'm not. This has not been determined as of now. Chances are good that it might be in 4.2, depending on the release date of it. Yeah, but it might as well be 4.3. The reason for that is that the core team just wants to make sure that they do it right, because of the commitment to backwards compatibility that WordPress has. Everything that they bring in, they need to support for the foreseeable future, and so they want to make sure that everything they do bring in on that part is solid. So a bit more testing, a bit more applications that use it. I think that's still necessary. Yes?
Is there an easy way to stay up to date on new feature plugins?
Is there an easy way to stay up to date with new feature plugins? Yes. So there's a site on make.wordpress.org/core that has an overview over all feature plugins currently in development. Also, if you have a development checkout of WordPress, or you have the beta tester plugin activated, it will add a tab to your plugin screen that will show the feature plugins that are currently in the repository. We're still working on getting that better, making that better, and having those plugins regularly updated too, so it makes more sense for testers to test them. But on makewordpress.org/core, there's an overview of the current feature plugins. You're welcome. Any other question? Yes?
The idea for that REST API, what kind of authentication will be required for cross-platform, cross-site media sharing?
Any idea of what authentication will be required for cross-platform media sharing? Not really, honestly. I think Andrew Nason will be here later on today. He might be able to answer that question. I've not been involved closely with the development of the REST API. But thanks for the question. No more? Thank you very much for coming. Thanks.